Office of National Statistics, so these are national statistics, 1 in 4 adult women over the age of 18 are severely sexually assaulted and raped. When I was a young adult, I unfortunately experienced a number of different sexual traumas, and I was suddenly surrounded by a gang of men in their 20s, and they handcuffed me to a fence and just were surrounding me and coming closer and closer and taunting me, and it was terrifying. And there was this one club in Leicester Square, and to walk across from where the seats were to where the bar was, you had to kind of cross the dance floor. And I remember walking across, and I always wore trousers deliberately, but I was groped 5 times between my legs just walking across. No one acknowledged that that was any kind of trauma. In the months after that, it really impacted my mood, and I became really depressed and suicidal. My GP at the time said, I don't know what you've got to be upset about. You're a young girl, you should just go out and get a boyfriend. And I just found all of this research, all of this evidence about psychological trauma, what causes it, what what goes on in the body with it, and importantly, how we can heal from it. And that study's been repeated, and the same results have been reproduced. So if we learnt about this, it would totally change healthcare, and most importantly, change people's lives.
Why are we not? Why is this not recognised?
I think everyone has a choice, and everyone's got the potential to heal. It's not easy. Google did a study a few years ago, I think it was in 2016, 2015, looking at what made the best team, like what are the qualities that made a team work best. And the number one thing, main thing, we've said it already, healing's possible for everyone. The way that people do that,
I'm on a mission to help the world to see success differently. Through sharing the stories of our guests, I hope to inspire those that listen. This is the Different Hats podcast, produced by H2 Productions. I hope you can join us on this journey. I just wanted to take a moment to talk about one of our sponsors, Nostos, an authentic experience of Greece right here in the heart of Hove. In a world brimming with dining options, finding that one place that captivates your palate and heart isn't always easy. It's about more than food. It's the stories, the ambience, the slice of another world. This is the essence of Nostos, an award-winning Greek restaurant. With traditional recipes passed down through generations, each dish promises a story and a piece of heritage. And Nostos is more than just a restaurant, it's a community contributor. Each dining experience supports initiatives close to their heart, from local charities to cultural events, enriching Brighton and Hove's social fabric. They also provide catering services, bringing Greek cuisine to your personal events. For a taste of Greece without leaving town, visit nostos-hove.co.uk. And when you do go, say Sam recommended the feta nests. Oh my God, they are amazing. Okay, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I am here with the amazing Dr. Susanna Petche. Susanna, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for inviting me here, Sam.
Listen, we connected obviously recently online, and fortunately met up for a coffee recently as well, and certainly the stuff that you do around within the trauma space is incredible, and we had a wonderful conversation. I'm really grateful for you taking the time to come on, and excited to delve in and have a chat. So look, we're gonna kick off as we always do.
Yep.
Talk to me what success means to you. How do you define it?
So I think how I define success has changed. So how I define success now, I think is having to some degree a sense of peace and contentment inside that's linked with how safe we feel. Because I think when we don't feel safe inside ourselves and we don't have that kind of sense of peace, there's always that striving. So I know, like 10, 15, 20 years ago, I thought success was more that traditional way of looking at success. And I had on the outside a mortgage, a house, married, 2 kids, doctor, was outwardly working in a, very responsible role. And it looked like I should, had the kind of the epitome of success of what we would, outwardly define as success, and what I think when I was a child I would have viewed that as success. But I was so unhappy. And no one really saw that. And now I'm in a rented house, still married and have 2 kids. But I now look at things differently, and I have that sense of knowing more what I want, knowing more who I am, understanding myself, and that sense of kind of more inner peace and inner safety, that there's less striving.
I'm really interested in that. A couple of things there for me. What was the turning point for you for the shift in your mindset for that? Share that.
I think I had known or had this feeling that something wasn't right with me for a long time, for kind of decades, really, my whole adult life. But I had other people always telling me, well, you should be fine, you should be very lucky, kind of count your lucky stars, and, what have you got to complain about, kind of thing. And it wasn't until I became really unwell, which I know we're going to go into a bit more, and I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder 9 years ago. And that in itself was such a shock, because I thought, am I even allowed to be ill when I should look like I'm okay? Like I earn money, I have a job, I have a husband, I have a family, I have a home, I'm respected in my work. Like, what have I got to complain about? And there was a lot of shame and guilt for even being unwell. And that real questioning of, well, everyone thinks I'm successful, so I should feel successful, I should be okay, but I really wasn't. And it was essentially me falling apart and completely unravelling, and then having to build myself up and realising that actually where I am now, I'm so much happier, on every level. And so what I then look for in success, and also what I want for my kids, is very different.
Why then, because I listened to you talk, and I know we spoke obviously offline. Like, the reason I do the podcast and I speak to people is that, and I've spoke to people, like you said, from traditional metrics, doctor, very successful, Olympic champion, multi-millionaires, whoever that definition from the outside looking in, and yet everyone that's been on who spoke about it, and I don't know about even redefining it now. I'm almost looking at how we reframe. Maybe reframing is a better word to use. Reframing success in ourselves. But why then, as a society, do we still, are those metrics still measured? Like, you're talking now opposite me, saying that I'm happier now where I am because I've looked inward and I know who I am, and I've dealt with what's been going on with me, and I understand myself, and I'm at peace with myself. Why is it, as a society, that the chase want to be and tick these boxes, that is still the metric in which we measure?
It's hard looking inside. Like, it means looking at hard stuff, and I think, particularly in this culture, in this country, we don't like looking at hard stuff. We like to just kind of put on a smile, and that there's that phrase everywhere, keep calm and carry on. And I think that idea of just You know, people say, "How are you?" and you're expected to go, "I'm fine." You're not expected to go, "Oh no, I'm not okay." Like, I remember I lived in Spain for a year when I was younger. My mum was studying Spanish, so we were there for a year, and we stayed, spent some time with a Spanish family, and I remember the grandmother had her friend like in a flat, and a neighbour would come in, and they'd meet each other, and they'd say, "How are you?" And she'd say, "Oh, I'm terrible today, you know, Father Death still hasn't taken me." And and the other one would say, "No, mine hasn't. I'm still here too. He hasn't taken me either." And, "Oh, and my head hurts," and, "Oh, and my back hurts. Let's go and watch the soap opera." You know, and that was kind of, they were honest about how they were feeling and sharing that. Whereas I think here we don't like to see people's discomfort. We don't like to share that. We really don't like vulnerability. And so it's easier to not look inside and say, actually, this is what we need to do. And it feels somehow easier to measure, and we can push it all out.
It really does, mate. So, and you listen to, and you know, I've shared on 100 episode and many episodes around the staggering statistics around when you talk about suicide, but then, you know, you go as far as that, but also just with mental health as we are in a crisis right now, right?
Yeah.
But like, I guess trying to recognise that the answer to that question is it because the answer to the question is always, "Oh yeah, I'm fine," because we don't want to be perceived as someone that is maybe negative or struggling, because that allows vulnerability in.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got this. Is it that we've just been brought up in a society? And is it a British thing that it's like this? Do you think? I don't know. Like, is it a global thing? I've only ever lived here, so you go, like, is it this thing that whereas as a society in Britain that we do just, it's by saying that we're not okay, that feels that we've got to put it on someone else to fix that problem. Do you think that?
There's kind of lots of questions in that.
Yeah.
I think I do think there is something culturally about this country. I think I've had the opportunity to travel and live in a couple of different countries, and I think there is something about countries where they're outside more, maybe express emotion more. And that's not to say that those countries don't have mental health issues, but I think that vulnerability of just getting it out and saying how you feel, and also having more movement. So countries where there's more expressivity in their, not just verbally, but also in their movement, in dance, and that's something that is just part of the culture. I think that that's a healthier way of being. And I think in this country we tend to hold in and suppress emotions more. I think things are changing. I think that the younger generation are more tapping into emotions and being more expressive about it, which is brilliant. But certainly the way that I was brought up, and not just my family, but seeing around my peers as I grew up and what we were taught in school, I remember being told children should be seen and not heard. And that just being, you know, just play quietly in the corner. And it's like, you know, you're a kid. You want to run around and say things and show joy and show sadness and frustration. But if we don't allow that, we turn that inwards and suppress that and push that down. And then that creates problems. So I don't know whether it's then that we expect someone else to fix it. I think it's just we disconnect from it and we just don't associate with it at all.
Do you think, like, then looking at the next generation and how we change that, now, is it, let's go back to schools and we look at, like, how, again, even at schools, the academic success is measured, but emotional intelligence EQ, it's not measured, is it? There's
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
GCSE for that. The like building relationships, kindness, these type of. I mean, do you think? Like, and I always say, and I know we sort of spoke when we spoke offline. I said I feel like I am. I badmouth the education system. I don't. I feel like it's broken, and I do. Is there a place in a school environment to measure EQ? Do you think?
Yes. I mean, and I think also just to kind of say, I think teachers are absolutely doing their best. And I think it's, the lack of funding that there has been in the education system has been really detrimental, and focusing on kind of measuring those academic targets, and that teachers and schools are then kind of measured performance-wise along that, puts so much unnecessary pressure on the staff, which is then translated down to the students. If we could remove that and look at, or at least minimise, I'm not saying get rid of it completely, but kind of shift the emphasis to having more the life skills, the life skills of how do you relate to another human being in real time? How do you manage emotions when they're difficult? How do you manage them in yourself? How do you manage it in someone else who's in front of you? How do you say things that are honest but not hurtful? It's all of those things are what we need, not just in the playground, but we need it in our personal relationships, intimate relationships, and we so need it at work. And that's where not understanding that, there's often so much misunderstanding that causes so much heartache and problems, that if we could teach kids when they're younger that it just becomes part of how we grow, that would just solve so many problems.
I'm so, because I've started this podcast and I'll do it, and because I believe I want to have an impact and try and change how we reframe success, and so that it can maybe have an impact on that tragic statistic, right? But actually, listening to you talk, and more I talk about it with people, is the more that actually we've got to start right at the beginning from childhood, and give him, because I think one of the problems, as you've highlighted, is that we haven't got the tools, have we? We haven't got the tools.
No.
Growing up, we weren't taught those.
Yeah.
How to express emotion, whether and have that feeling inside where you go, I'm struggling at the moment. I'm okay to share that with you, and then what's the person receiving that information is able to, whether they fix it or not, but sometimes just sitting there with you and being able to it's okay, this is a tough situation, this is a tough discussion, we can just sit and allow these emotions to manifest. I mean, I guess from my point of view, where do we even start with that? Where do we even start to challenge that?
I think it like you say, it starts right at the beginning. I think it's looking at starting when people are looking to start out and have a family. So I think one of the things that was hugely beneficial in this country was the Sure Start schemes that helped pregnant mothers, and when people had just given birth, and it was a centre, a place to go where you got support as a new mother of what to do, how to be with a child. And unfortunately, funding's been cut around that. But I think one of the issues that we've got in this country is that people often move around and aren't that connected to their families and communities. And so when a child is brought into the world, if you don't have that role modelling from other members of the family, it may not be your mother, but it might be an aunt or a cousin or a grandmother, to just show you what normal is and what's okay, and that it's okay to find it hard, it's okay to struggle, and how to manage and navigate that. If we don't have that community around us, where do we go? And so these places were somewhere where you could express that fear, that difficulty, the struggle with it. But if you don't have that, people literally are on their own. They don't know what to do. And so if they haven't had that role model to themselves, they don't know how to parent. They don't know what to do. And so I think we can fall into this thing of blaming parents, but, you know, vast majority of parents, people, they do the best they can with the information that they have at that time. And if they don't have any information, they're going to struggle. And that's when they pass things on inadvertently, without meaning to. But if we can acknowledge that there's a gap and look at supporting with compassion and without judgment, just being there, really that loving, supporting, nourishing guidance, advice, help, that's everything, because that sets people off right from the start.
Because you're right, there's no rule book. Because you become a parent, no rule book out there that says this is how you should. And a lot of it we do, like you said, it's learned behaviour, I guess, isn't it? So it's, you know, my parents done, and I think my parents were great. I was brought up with unconditional love and amazing, but still things that I'm sure that they got wrong, and I look at the things I question about, actually levels of communication, the stuff I talk to my kids about, I never talk to my mum and dad about, you know. So I think that's a shift. But you're right. Is there a framework that we can put in place that we can give to parents, like you said, that training and structure to deal with this? And then it is that from that we take that into schools as well, so teachers are armed with these tools as well, and there's an ongoing narrative around that. So it's what we're creating. I guess I wonder whether some of the, I'm interested to get your take on this, some of the pushback that I feel that I might get on some of the things I talk about is around, but are we creating this soft world where then people are not ambitious and they're not trying to strive for things, and we're all just okay and happy in this woo-woo world? And I don't believe that. I personally don't believe it, because I'm in that headspace and I'm on a journey for that right now. But I'm more ambitious today than I've ever been, probably ever.
Yeah.
I'm keen with your reframing in your head and what you've been through. Where does that sit with you? Like, because you did hit them markers of success, right? And you've reframed that, and you're okay and enough where you are now, and you, like you said, at peace with yourself. But where do you sit with that within the ambition side of stuff?
No, it's a really good question. I was thinking about this earlier. I think absolutely people can have this idea of thinking, oh, it just means we're all soft and you know, and just kind of not doing anything. Like, I think, I mean, I know it's going on a tangent. Non-competitive sports days really annoy me. But yeah, I think I'm still really ambitious. There's so much that I want to achieve, but it's the energy behind it is different. So in the past, I wanted to do it. I wanted to do things and achieve things for approval, to get external approval and validation, because that was what my self-worth needed. Whereas now, I want to do things because I want to be of service, and I want to share, for me personally, the message about being trauma-informed, understanding how trauma shows up, how it impacts every facet of our lives, and to empower people with the knowledge and understanding to heal themselves. And I know that knowledge is there, and I want to share it as far and as wide as I can. So I've got huge ambitions of how to do that, but it's not linked to my self-worth and my value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. It really does, and I think because I'm on a journey with that myself, so I feel like I resonate. I really resonate with it. So, like I say, I'm probably in a similar. Hence why we probably connected quite quickly, and it was like I think we're on the same page, because for me, I want to get out there and I want to be on stages and I want to share my message and shout from the rooftops this feeling I've got around reframing success, and the reason behind it is because there's something else. But again, because everything I'm choosing to do at the moment is in alignment with some values that I've got.
Yeah.
And it's wondering how that, like, but me and you are talking now and we're understanding, and I'm always trying to look at it from both sides. I'm trying to go, but does education, does the workplace, the economy, does it allow for this mindset? Allow for these, because I think if we create a generation where we're doing this, where there will build an abundance of money will become a byproduct of maybe the things that we're all doing, right? But we're building leaders and people that are out there doing it based on their core values and who they are.
Yeah.
But who's going to? The people are going to challenge that. Are they the economy? The people, like the people at the top, who are looking at those things. Are they going to look at that and go, yeah, but are we going to achieve what we do with finances, and is the economy going to be stable if we're building foundations on based on this?
Yeah, but I think if people's values are that they, if you ask for a lot of people, their values. So there's this idea within coaching of kind of away from motivation and towards motivation. Yeah, so that away from motivation is I want to get away from things that are difficult. So away from motivation for me were things like doing things for approval. That's not going towards something positive. It's that I want approval. I want to improve my self-worth. I want recognition. Like that's all kind of away from. But more towards motivation are things like to be of service, to be authentic, to have, to go towards freedom. Like those are more kind of like looking towards the future. And most people who've done a little bit of work on themselves actually want to be of service, want to make the world a better place, want to care about the environment, want to care about their neighbours, want to connect with other people. And when you come from that place, things are just going to get better. You're not going to harm each other, harm the environment. It's about then working together to improve things around us.
Love that.
I always think of that quote from Maya Angelou. It's like, together we rise.
Yeah.
It's like helping each other and then we'll do. It's not about saying, we're all going to do things for free. It's helping, supporting, paying each other what our value is. But our goal is that we all want to improve things.
Yeah. I genuinely listen. I'm hearing you, and I'm thinking you. I hope as a society, with more people, more of these types of conversations, I hope as a society and as that next generation that we can create that. I do believe that, and that's why we're on this pub. But then talk to me. Then let's go back to the beginning for you. Right? Let's go back to the start of your journey. What do I need to know about you growing up that shaped this journey for you, and who sits here in front of us today?
So I think I grew up in quite a traditional family where my dad worked, and I think so the things that I kind of saw as success, that my dad worked in the same business for many years and kind of that kind of going to work and then coming back and working in the garden, and I've got an older brother. I think one of the things that really shaped me is my mum was born in Hungary and was a refugee after the war in Germany. And so that inherited trauma from what she experienced as a young child, and then that sense of belonging, I think that was always a bit of a thread going through my life. But then when I was a young adult, I unfortunately experienced a number of different sexual traumas, and that obviously had a huge impact on me. And I think I've been thinking about them kind of in because I knew you were going to ask me about this, that there were some that were very serious, but there were a couple that happened when I was younger, like when I was 16. We were rushing for a train, like a last train from to get back from somewhere, and I was separated somehow from my friends. These things always happen very quickly. And I was suddenly surrounded by a gang of men in their 20s, and they handcuffed me to a fence and just were surrounding me and coming closer and closer and taunting me. And it was terrifying. And then one of them said, "She looks really scared," and a police car came, and that's when they let me go. And my friends pretended as if nothing happened. And that made me kind of question, well, was that a problem? Like, did something happen? Maybe it was my fault. Did I invite it? So it was just kind of didn't deal with it at all. And that lack of acknowledgement and you know, something that we talk about now, that bystander awareness, that certainly wasn't anything that was an issue. We just kind of got on with it. When I was at university, I remember my first year at university, there was always these, I studied in London, there were these clubs in central London that gave you like really cheap tickets as a student with like loads of alcohol with it. And there was this one club in Leicester Square, and to walk across from where the seats were to where the bar was, you had to kind of cross the dance floor. And I remember walking across, and I always wore trousers deliberately, but I was groped 5 times between my legs just walking across. And again, people saw that as well, you're kind of lucky, like you should be, it's a compliment, rather than that's so not okay. So again, you kind of have this, well, I kind of think something's not okay here, but it happens to other people, so and they don't seem upset, so should I be upset? And so there's this constant questioning of what your internal feeling of right and wrong is, and your intuition and your gut feeling around it is constantly being kind of questioned and squashed down. And then unfortunately I ended up in a situation where I was at work in a bar and I was raped by one of my colleagues. And when I mentioned that to tried to say something to our boss, and she just called me a silly little girl, that it had been my fault and I'd led him on. So again, just totally blamed myself and just suppressed it all down. And no one acknowledged that that was any kind of trauma. In the months after that, it really impacted my mood and I became really depressed and suicidal. First time I was on antidepressants. Ended up, I even saw a psychiatrist. My GP at the time said, "I don't know what you've got to be upset about. You're a young girl. You should just go out and get a boyfriend. That'll make you feel better."
Your GP said
my
that?
GP said that. My therapist at the time said, "You just have to accept there's some really negative, dark part in your mind that you're just going to have the rest of your life. And you just need to accept that, and that's how it is." And so I pushed it all down, carried on with my studies and got on with life. But trauma has this way of just staying in your body, as Bessel van der Kolk's book, it's like the body keeps the score, it's there. And I had lots of symptoms, particularly, really, really bad periods. And we know there's a big link of, having really bad periods and sexual trauma. There was something where, a lot of women before their periods can feel quite flat, so that premenstrual syndrome. But there can be something called premenstrual dysphoria disorder, where you get really, really low and to the point of being suicidal every month. With hindsight, I clearly had that for decades. No one knew, no one mentioned that at all. And so I just thought, well, there's something wrong with me, so I just kept pushing it down. And I saw so many therapists, and even saw a therapist, probably the last one was about 11 years ago. And once I had children, I found that, it felt like all of my trauma came up even more. And this therapist said, "Yeah, you've just got anger issues and you're just an angry person and clearly not a very good mother, and that's just your fault and you have to just deal with that. And there's not more I can do with you." so he ended the session after 30 minutes and charged me the full session. And I kind of had this constant, like, something's not right, something just doesn't feel right, just doesn't sit right. But, you know, I went to so many different people asking for help and no one got it. And then I, by chance, went to see, you know, I had another episode. I kind of go through my, you know, 20s, 30s, early 40s of, you know, crashing with my mood and then trying to pick myself up. So crashing down, seeing a therapist, having antidepressants, getting well enough to stop that and carrying on, pushing it all down again. So I had another one of these where my mood really went down. Thought, okay, I'm depressed again. Everyone tells me I've got depression. Went to see this particular therapist who said, I don't actually think this is depression. I think you've got more anxiety. I was like, no, I don't identify as having anxiety. You know, I'm a GP. You know, at least a third of what we do is mental health. I've been in commissioning. I've been lead commissioner for mental health. Like, I'd recognise this. She was like, okay. And then I found myself telling her about this episode that had happened in the pub where I'd been raped. And she very gently said, you know, I actually think you've got post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was like, do you know who I am? Like, I would know this. And I couldn't believe that she was telling me something where I think, you know, mental health's my bag. I've always been interested in mental health and always worked in this. And she said, you know, don't go away and read about it. Just come back next week and we'll have a look. So obviously I went home and Googled it and looked up as much as I could. And then found this term, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and was like, never heard of that. And it was like reading about my life. It was literally about reading, like, living with me. And just something just kind of snapped and I became really unwell. It's like all of the, you know, decades of having pushed everything down, it just then all came out. And I was really, really not able to function and couldn't work for 6 months. And in me trying to understand what was going on with myself, I started trying to read and find anything to comprehend what was going on in my brain and body, because this was so totally alien. It just didn't make sense. And like I said, I thought, you know, I'm not just a doctor, but I really am interested in mental health, and I should know this. I should be able to fix myself, understand myself, diagnose myself. And I couldn't. And it was terrifying, the thought that I'd never get well, never be able to work again. And that's when I came across this book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And I was like, wow, there's people writing about this, and there's loads of research about this. And so, and I, with the help of that original therapist, she directed me to someone who specialises in working with people with trauma. So I found this amazing therapist who I credit with saving my life. And then I found a course, a master's in psychological trauma, because as a doctor, you need to have more letters after your name, you know. So, and I signed up, and I remember speaking to the professor of the course and was like, so if I drop out after a year, do I still get some kind of qualification? And she was like, look, we don't really enrol people with that in mind. But anyway, so I enrolled, never thinking I'd finish it. And I just found all of this research, all of this evidence about psychological trauma, what causes it, what and you know, what goes on in the body with it, and importantly, how we can heal from it. Like, there's loads of stuff out there, and yet as a doctor I'd never been taught about it. And I couldn't believe, you know, none of the umpteen therapists I'd seen, no one had mentioned it at all. It was just this one therapist had mentioned it.
Okay, I'm just going to say something about one of our sponsors, Riverval. The world of cars, vans and minibuses is often a pain point for many of us. The hassle of finding the right vehicle, let alone looking after it, are all more things to add to our lists as busy people. Riverval's mission is to make motoring manageable, and that's why they provide leasing, purchasing, servicing and vehicle management. So whether you have one family car or a fleet of vans for your business, Riverval are your trusted vehicle supplier. Visit www.riverval.co.uk. Okay, let's jump back to the podcast. Why is that? Because just in doctor training, in therapy, in all of the training, there's just not enough. There's not enough training around this. They just didn't have the tools to understand that, or
it's, to be honest, it's baffling. So what I'd learned is that post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is something to do with war and combat.
yeah.
And so
If you
it's
say
just
that
to do
me,
with
that's
soldiers.
the first thing.
Yeah. So the idea that it's to do with anything else, it just, you wouldn't think that. So there's a book called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, DSM, that's published by the American Psychiatric Association, and that's kind of nicknamed the Bible of mental health disorders. And although it's published in the States, we use it here and all over the world, and that lists all of the mental health conditions with their diagnostic categories and what you do about them. And it's using those diagnostic categories that our mental health services are commissioned. So it's looking at what's in there. Those are the services that we have then for the public. And PTSD was only put in there after a huge amount of campaigning by Vietnam vets in the 1980s. And then it only got acknowledged as being something due to sexual trauma in the revision in 94, and in the latest iteration in the DSM-5 in the 2013, there's still nothing about complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It's just not in there. So therefore it's not acknowledged, therefore we don't have services around it. And all of those psychiatrists who write it all are affiliated with pharmaceutical companies. So there is a vested interest in keeping people on medication. There is so much evidence out there that actually, firstly, you don't need to talk about it, because talking about it in detail can re-traumatise people. So talking therapies can be hugely helpful, but for many people with significant trauma, complex trauma, repeated trauma, to keep going over and over and over the detail just re-traumatises people and doesn't move them forward. And there's so much else that can be done to help people, but we don't talk about it. There's a study that was done in 97 in America by these two doctors, Felitti and Ander, they worked in Kaiser Permanente, called the ACE study, or Adverse Childhood Experience Study, where they looked at these 10 questions, 10 adverse childhood experiences, things like parental neglect, emotional trauma, sexual trauma, abuse. So there's a list of 10 things, and linked those with the more of ACEs people have experienced by the time they're 18, the more physical and mental health conditions they have. So you have an increased risk of cancer, of heart disease, of lung disease, of learning difficulties, and yet we don't learn about it. And this was, this is done decades ago, and that study's been repeated and the same results have been reproduced. So if we learnt about this, it would totally change healthcare and, most importantly, change people's lives.
Why are we not then? Why is this not recognised?
I think it goes a little bit back to what we were saying earlier, that it's hard to look at. People don't want to acknowledge it. So by acknowledging that trauma is that common, it means acknowledging that there's perpetrators of abuse and trauma around us. So we like to think that it happens to, down and out drug addicts, kind of the people that we look down on in society, because we do. That's how society works. So we'd rather think it happens to them over there. It doesn't happen to kind of nice people and normal people. And so the idea that actually perpetrators of abuse could be living, working around us, we don't want to think about that. It makes us feel safer to pretend and to be in that denial that it doesn't happen. But of course, then we're not acknowledging that for the people it happens to, and we're also removing blame from the perpetrators. And it means that we're not then learning, well, how, why are there so many people behaving in that way, and what can we do to support them to realise that's not okay and to learn differently.
There's so many things. I guess firstly, thank you for sharing, obviously, all of that with us. And I guess from the three different experiences that you've had, listening and trying to understand that, as you know, I've got daughters and I'm bringing them up in a world that I want to keep them safe and I want to give them this information, but actually recognising that it's not 100% not your fault. But is it that we need to be teaching boys and men how not to behave as opposed to just teaching our daughters and our women to protect themselves, but teaching our boys how not to. I mean, there's obviously, I guess, on topic now with the film or the Netflix series Adolescence out, right? And what that highlights and the messages the toxic messages that potentially they're getting from social media and being online, and how we, I guess, is it back to education, parenting, bringing out kids into society? Is this the starting point? Is this where it needs to be addressed?
Yeah, and I think it absolutely is. It's not about it's about just having the conversation and bringing it out into the open. And I think where things have been up to now, even police advice. So after the horrific murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer, the advice from the police was that women should look out for what they're wearing, and and should get a bus home. These is all putting it onto women, rather than we need to look at the wider society. And this way of being is not serving men. So we need to look at, well, what can we do differently to support boys and young men and men to feel able to be vulnerable, to be able to express how they're feeling, and to manage that in a way that is healthy and helpful and not harmful to either themselves or anyone else. So it requires hard conversations, and we kind of tend to shy away from that. And I think you're right, it happens through everything, but it happens, at schools or at youth clubs or at sports clubs or, in the workplace. It's just having that openness about it rather than pretending it doesn't happen, because it's that secrecy and silencing that perpetuates that shame, that denial, that judgment. Whereas when we talk about it without judgment, then we can start to dispel the shame.
Because I guess a couple of things. One is, again, you used that word a couple of times, but vulnerability. Now, again, back to reframing, and there's so many things that I think need reframing from society, but with that being one of them, that vulnerability, especially I guess amongst men and boys, is that it is a sign of real strength as opposed to weakness. Yeah. And I think that's probably a lot of that aspect is, I can't be vulnerable, I can't show emotion because that shows that I'm weak. And I need to portray myself as someone that's of strength. And that's just an archaic way, I guess, of looking at it. But I guess for you, as I guess as a doctor and someone who understands this now and has shown vulnerability and been able and realising the power, how that can help to, I guess, that's helped to heal you, I guess.
Yeah.
And how then to people that come and speak to you, are you able to get that across to them? Like, how do we break that mould when you're someone who maybe hasn't done the work on themselves as much as you have? Where do they start?
It's giving permission for it. So if you kind of, so it's is a number of things. Firstly, modelling it. So if I'm not vulnerable, people aren't going to want to be vulnerable. And I think it's also important to acknowledge the distinction. Being vulnerable doesn't mean you need to show everything and share everything. It's not about, there's limits, and there's, having boundaries around what you share, but vulnerability is being open and honest about what feel up to a point that feels comfortable about what's going on, and having emotion, because having emotion just shows we're human. And for me, there's no good and bad emotions. There's just emotion, and it just shows that we're human beings, and they're all wonderful. So it's about modelling that vulnerability, and then it's kind of inviting permission for other people to be vulnerable. So giving that space. So when I speak, so in a clinical setting, when I speak to patients, I never start with kind of you're doing this, or you should do this, or I see this in you. I kind of remove it to a third person. To often when I see people present with similar things to you, sometimes they might have had some kind of difficulties in their past. So it gives them the option of saying, no, that's not relevant to me. Or actually, yeah, maybe that is. So it's kind of separating it one step from them.
Because I guess if we're uncomfortable with that, there's a little bit of comfort knowing that maybe there's other people over there that are going through something similar. Yeah,
so it's highlighting you're not the only one. Like, you're really, that's really unusual that you're like that. I'm saying I see this all the time. And in those people who often come with, seeing people with certain kinds of pain, or, it's often things like people coming with certain abdominal pain or with migraines. Obviously we need to check there's nothing physically serious there, like some kind of appendicitis, or, something severe going on in the head. But often there is some kind of stress or trauma that is past trauma that's linked with that, or it could be ongoing trauma. So saying to people, well, I see this a lot, and often, we've looked through and we've ruled out that there is something really serious going on. And so often, in my experience, I see that people are really stressed, and maybe it might be they're in a really difficult work situation, or they're really worried about money, or it might be something that's happened in their past that they're still dealing with, they've not really dealt with. And I wonder if that might resonate with you. And people might say yes, and we can explore that further. Some people might say no, because they're just not ready, and that's totally fine. And some people might say no, but then they go away and think about it. They're not ready in that moment to share or to open up, but you've planted that seed that actually it's okay to make those links, and it's okay to be vulnerable and give people space and permission. And then often they come back and say, that thing that you kind of said, kind of been thinking about that, and can you just say a bit more about that? And so it's giving people permission and space that it's okay to talk about it.
Do you think that it's one of these couple of things? One is that we don't have the tools to know how to communicate those feelings, but I guess more so that there's shame around that. Is that the feeling, like, if something's happened to us, we don't want to share that because we feel like, is that how you felt? Like, go back to those times, did you feel embarrassed, shame around those?
Yeah, horrific shame. And shame is really corrosive, because shame is something that it just eats away at your soul, and it thrives in, Brené Brown talks about how it thrives in secrecy and denial and silence and judgment. And it's that you turn it in on yourself. So rather than acknowledging, okay, well, actually, it was due to the perpetrator, whoever did whatever. It's because of what I was wearing, because I had a drink, because I looked at them in a certain way, because I said a certain thing, because of I didn't try hard enough, I didn't work hard enough. Like, there are so many reasons. And the number of times that, as you know, I'm going kind of by my own experience as a woman with any kind of sexual trauma, you're just asked literally, what were you wearing? Were you drunk? It's like, what's that got to do with it? Like and that's asked over and over again, and that's our perception. And so we do blame, we do tell other people, we do put it onto them. So then, yeah, you turn it in on yourself. Because if it's not other people and it's to do with you, and other people who you care about and respect are telling you that it's you, well, then it's got to be you, hasn't it? So then you start to believe that you are a bad person. And what happens with that is that it makes it very, very difficult to be in relation with other people, because you're constantly doubting yourself, you're questioning yourself, you're not going to put yourself out there and take a risk with a relationship, whether that's a friendship, whether that's an intimate relationship. At work, you're not going to be the one who's going to put themselves forward for a promotion, or if you've got an idea about some innovative idea that's going to, transform the workplace, you're not going to put your hand up in case actually you could be wrong, and then everyone will laugh at you and humiliate you even more. So it makes you stay small and keeps you small, and you just end up in this horrific shame spiral.
Did that affect that? Because I hear what you're saying, but you've had that experience, still gone on to achieve, like, again, from society, still went on and become but did it affect your relationships in that sense, like after that experience and over the last 20 years?
Yeah, I found it really hard to build friendships. So I had friendships from when I was very young as a student, but then when we moved around, found it really hard to make friends as an adult, and I just thought that was me. There was something wrong with me. I constantly questioned in my relationship whether I was worthy of being loved, and whether my kids and my husband would be better off without me. I mean, that was something constantly. And when I was really unwell, I mean, it was really hard to actually stay alive, because I just believed that genuinely they were better off without me, because I was such a bad, evil person. And I truly believed that. There were, so many opportunities of things like, I don't know, people suggesting that I go for a certain job, or that I write up certain cases and get publications, because getting publications is a really important part of career progression within medicine. I never did it, because I thought, who am I to write that up? Who am I to go for that job? So there were although I realise I know I did achieve a lot, there's so much I didn't do, because I just kind of thought, no, I can't do that.
Almost like an imposter syndrome type.
But way, like, it really
amplified.
excessive, really amplified. And the idea of being seen, being visible, and this is still something I'm working on now, like having my own business now, and now I'm kind of, trying to do these things of sharing this message around trauma, having to talk about myself and be visible, like even being here was like, it took a lot for me to come here, because it's that fear of being visible. It's not just, oh, it makes me a little bit nervous. It feels life-threatening to be visible.
Wow. But yet you still push yourself out of comfort zone to do it.
Yeah.
Why?
So, in the past or now?
No.
Now, because my mission is more important. It's not about me. It's about helping other people. And if I can help one other person not go through what I went through, one other person have the hope that there's not something broken in them, that actually they're okay, they're just, their behaviours, their responses are due to trauma, and give them hope for healing, then it's all worth it.
What a wonderful thing that you are doing, and especially like I'm well aware that sometimes I sit in this position where I talk about, and people share some horrific things that have happened to them, and I'm genuinely grateful for that, and I'm the same. I'm at a point where you sort of look at it and you just go, the bravery, the vulnerability, and the courage that takes to do that and share so openly. And like you said, I guess for people listening, you're doing it right. You're giving people permission by you sharing what you are, by doing on the mission that you're on and the path that you're taking. You're allowing, and this is how change happens, right? This is the only way we can change things, is if we stand up and go, I'm this person, I'm able to be like this, so I'm giving you permission to do that. So I guess it's like a message to people listening. I guess what would that be if people out there are listening to it and they're feeling a bit lost, or they're feeling like, because how long did that period go on for you for, like, before that conversation? Like, how many years are we talking from the initial traumas to you reframing it and coming out of that?
About 25 years. And that's why I think if I can spare someone even a couple of years, then it's worth it. And I think it's just that over and over how I was told I was wrong. But there was, I don't know why, I don't know where it came from, but just there was this little part of me that was like, it just doesn't make sense. There's just something that doesn't sit right. And fortunately just kept seeking and seeking, to then get to the point of finding this out. And so I feel now I'm in this incredible position that I have this opportunity, that I've got this knowledge, that I've lived through it. I've got this academic knowledge and like 25 years of being a doctor, that I can share this and I can help other people. So I kind of have to do it. I mean, I know we always have a choice, but it feels bigger than me, that if I can help other people, then, like, of course I'm going to do that.
And I guess back to your initial thing, you was talking about being of service and helping others, and I know we sort of mentioned, and again I've referred to it a few times, but one of the key elements of feeling successful is helping others to be successful. So whether that's helping others to reframe that in their own minds, I guess I'm really, just for people that don't try to understand complex post traumatic disorder, like the different levels of what that can look like. So like and I'm trying to get my understanding of it, that it can be of whatever type of trauma, because it's all our own trauma, whatever it is that we're going through. It's not as a comparison, surely.
Absolutely.
I think that's a message that I guess I want to try and share with people. Like, can you give us some examples of what the different levels would maybe be?
I think what you've just said is really important. So there's no hierarchy about trauma. So often we can have this thing of, I shouldn't feel that bad because it wasn't that bad what happened to me. Something worse happened to someone else. And that you're always going to find other people who have had worse things happen. And the thing is, it's not just the traumatic event. It's what happened inside of you as a result of that traumatic event. It's how you were met with that traumatic event. So, for example, one client that I've worked with was victim of a sexual violence when she was 15. She was raped, went to her family, and family just blamed her. that she was loose, she asked for it. And so what that did, so the way that was met was shaming again. And that set that individual on a path of being, so the words that she used, which she was made to feel like a black sheep in the family, like the really negative, bad one, set on a course of struggling with alcohol, abusive relationships. And it was then having that acknowledgement that what happened was trauma, and that not being recognised and met as a child was also traumatic. That then unlocked the healing. So some people can go through awful things, but and they are awful, but it makes a huge difference of what support they have around them and who else is with them. And also, like I said, in my family, there's stuff that happened before I was born that impacted me. So, the idea of inherited trauma makes a huge difference. And, thinking about the impact of colonisation, of racism, of poverty, like all of those things feed into it. So we can't say, well, that person is licensed to feel really awful, but that person isn't. Like, it's all very much individual and personal. And how it might show up, well, for some people, they are slightly impacted, but hardly at all. It occasionally might come up. And some people are at the other extreme where they're desperately unwell and need potentially even inpatient psychiatric care. Most people are in the middle. So there's this kind of spectrum. The problem is that the way that our medical system is with the diagnosis, we've got these strict criteria, and you're either in or you're not. And if you fit the criteria of PTSD, then you get support. But if you don't, then you don't. And it's kind of then you're deemed as fine because you don't fit that criteria. But did you fit into that initially then, or did you just, it wasn't recognised? It wasn't recognised, and it was something that wasn't recognised. And so that's where I talk about it as being on a spectrum rather than like you're in or you're not. And so that's why I talk about it as the psychological trauma spectrum. And for most people on that spectrum, they outwardly look like they're functioning, which is how I was most of my life. So to anyone who sees them in the street, at work, even in social situations, you think they're fine. But then the effort that it takes of putting on these masks of people pleasing, of just fitting in with everyone, of saying yes to things, the effort of that gets harder and harder. And at home, they're just exhausted, overwhelmed, really struggling. But we don't see that. So it can show up in so many different ways, in physical ways. So it can show up with extreme fatigue, pain, gut issues, headaches. It can show up with anxiety, with depression. It can show up with really struggling with intimate relationships. It can show up with just, really going under the radar at work. And essentially it's not thriving at life. It's not really living to your full potential. But everyone has got the possibility for that. And that's what I think is so important. It's not about yes, it's highlighting that trauma is really common, but then there's so much we can do. And when people acknowledge it and recognise it, then you can do stuff about it, and then we can really live to our full potential.
Okay, I just wanted to say something about one of our sponsors, Search 7. They are a search marketing agency for social good. They elevate brands' online exposure locally, nationally and globally through strategic SEO and paid media consultancy. They specialise in many different sectors, including charities, e-commerce, travel, health and medical education, and professional and creative services. They also give agencies and charities the exposure they deserve via their hosted agency and charity events, helping to build community and connections. Their pledge is the inspiration behind their name. Since they started in 2011, they have pledged to give back 7% of their profits to charity. This has become a minimum of 7% each year, with their current fundraising surpassing £150,000 in support of 63 charities. Their latest campaign, #Share177k, aims to raise £177,000 by the end of 2026 to mark their 15th birthday. It's a pleasure to have them as part of the Series 7 of the podcast. I'm delighted. Thanks so much for your support. Because I think for me that's a really, really strong message. Because of course, talking about trauma just by its nature, your immediate reaction is something that's a really negative. It's a negative experience, okay. But again, reframing that and taking a negative experience, a trauma, and putting a positive outcome on it to go, actually, we've all got, because we all want to live a life where we're thriving, right? On a daily basis, that we go out and we live, like as you mentioned there, live a life to our full potential. And like listening to your journey, I guess for you now, feels like you're stepping into that period. Of you, like, would I be right in saying that? And because you can tell out, like, even when we first met and we had a coffee, and here now, like, you can talk about trauma sense and what you're trying to achieve with this path, that you're thriving because you've understood that, and I guess it's just encouraging people who are listening to think to themselves that this is one part of my life, but it won't define me. I guess that's the
absolutely key. Absolutely, it's a part of me, and we're all made up of different parts, and those responses, those reactions that we have, they're actually all survival responses. And they're actually, when you look at it, they're all entirely normal responses to an abnormal situation that we went through. The problem is we can often get stuck. And when we're stuck, those responses are no longer serving us. But when we recognise them and we see it's not who we are, they're our responses, and we build a little bit of space between realising it's not me, they're responses, then we can start to look at them, and then they can start to dissolve.
I'm keen to explore that a little bit in regards to, you mentioned about choice earlier as well, and about wherever people are on that spectrum. Do you believe that we've all, whatever we've been through on them stages, there's always still we've all got a choice of how we go?
I do. I think everyone has a choice, and everyone's got the potential to heal. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's hard. But everybody has the potential to not be controlled by their trauma. Because how it can feel is that you're totally hijacked by these horrific experiences, these memories. And you don't need to be. It's hard, but it's possible. Totally believe that's possible. And I've seen it over and over and over with people. So I've seen it obviously in myself, but I've seen it in other people that I've worked with.
What's the first step for someone listening? What is the first step that if they're feeling any of these feelings, and just like you said, maybe not been diagnosed, just lost a little bit at the moment with those feelings, and it could potentially be somewhere they're sitting on that spectrum somewhere? What's the first thing that you could say to them?
Acknowledging it and compassion to yourself. Because we can be so critical of, we should be like this, we should have done this, we should have achieved this, we should have taken this opportunity, we should be okay by now, we should have got over it by now. But it's that acknowledging, okay, that actually that wasn't okay, and that compassion to ourselves. Okay, maybe I wasn't in a position previously to look at it, or I wasn't safe, I didn't feel safe in myself, I didn't have the resources to look at it. But we can very slowly start to look at it. And it's only looking at things and kind of titrating it to what feels safe and what feels comfortable. So we don't want to suddenly open it all up and look at it. So there's an amazing trauma therapist, author called Babette Rothschild, and she talks about analogy with a Coke bottle. So if you like have a Coke bottle that you've shaken, if you take the lid off, it explodes everywhere. But what we want to do when we look at trauma is just open it up a little bit. So you release a little bit and then you do it up. And then you open it up a little bit, release a little bit more, and then you do it up. So we're in control of when and how we open that lid. We don't need to share it with everybody. We don't need to tell people what we're doing. We can tell some people that we trust if we want to, but it's up to us. But that it's possible, absolutely.
That's such a brilliant analogy, and it makes so much sense, doesn't it? Because it is sometimes, like you said, that, and we're all unique human beings, right? And we're all gonna, not only are we on, I guess we're on a scale of potentially where some form of trauma lands, but our coping mechanisms, our upbringing, and everything else that we've been through in life have built our resilience and our other aspects to be able to cope with them. So everyone, I use this phrase so much, but our greatest reaction, our greatest freedom in life is how we react to things, right?
Yeah.
So how we react to a situation, and that's going to be different for every individual. So someone could have almost an identical trauma and deal with it in completely different ways.
Exactly.
And I guess it's understanding that, but the only way you understand that is if you undo that bottle just slowly at the pace some people might be ready to go, bang, I'm ready, let's open that up, and I want to deal with this now and cope with it.
Yeah.
But so I'm really like, because it's like listening to you talk is fascinating, and it's so important, I think. But you talk about a trauma informed world. Do you think this is like, again, back to that levels of communication, reframing stuff around that actually we normalise these types of conversations, that it's not a taboo subject, whether it be, and I know we spoke about this offline when we was having a coffee, but you know, whatever the subject is that we see as taboo, suicide, menopause, any of those topics that are seen as taboo, that trauma, for example, now, that if we normalise the conversations around, and does this, again, I've got so many questions in my head, I almost keep asking you about 10 questions at the same time, like, Sam, give me a question, I'll get there. But a couple of them. Firstly then, is it possible to address these topics in school, in education? I don't know, is that too young to start, or do we look at that just to give people the tools, so if they have if they do experience trauma in their lives, these are some coping mechanisms, or these are things that we can identify to recognise? Is that, what's your take on that? Is that how we become a trauma-informed world? We start again young?
I think it's. I mean, we have the potential and the power to impact every facet of society, and absolutely, we can look at starting it in schools. It can be something that, you know, kids, I think we kind of have this idea that kids, even, you know, when they're really small, even before they speak, they're too young, they don't really know what's going on. They know what's going on. They sense stuff. You know, babies, even in utero, in the womb, they pick up stuff, they sense stuff. So giving kids age-appropriate language and tools, that having an emotion is okay. Like, if something bad, sad, cruel happens, it's okay to be sad and angry. But what do you do with that sadness and anger? Do you beat up another kid? No. Do you do something to, like, beat up a load of pillows and cushions? Do you go and vent that anger and that frustration, that adrenaline that's in the body? Do you run around the playground? You know, there's this idea of, we have this stress survival cycle that we go through, that, you know, there's a traumatic event or a perception of an event, and it sets the body going through this cascade of things happening in the body with adrenaline, and then, you know, heart rate increases, all this stuff happens. And if you look at animals, they shake to discharge that excess adrenaline. We don't. We push it all down. But what if we taught kids that when you're really upset and really stressed about something, that you stand there and shake, and they put on some music, like, Taylor Swift, Shake It Off, and just shake it off in the middle of the day, or they just go for a run around the playground to vent off any frustration and anger they've got, and then they can just kind of talk it through with the person who's upset them, or have a space to express their feeling, rather than saying, oh, just it's past now, just pull yourself together. We want to encourage that openness. And if we had in the workplace an acknowledgement of creating safety, that psychological safety, which goes together with being trauma informed, of just having a safe workspace where people feel able to say if they're being bullied or they're being harassed, or that they just think, actually, this project that we're doing, I think we could do it in a completely different way and it would just work way better. But they need to feel safe to be able to say that. And if their idea goes wrong, are they going to be blamed? Or are they going to have someone saying, do you know what? It sounded like a great idea. It didn't work like that. Maybe we can tweak it and have another think. If we create that environment of openness and safety, people are going to be innovative. They're going to be creative. They're going to be more productive.
There's so much. Like, I listen to you talking, you just think that for us all to adopt that, workplaces, like you said, schools, because there is, again, back to that shame thing and embarrassment, and people don't want to necessarily speak out, and like, you could be like a really quiet person naturally, and you don't want to speak. I don't want to seem as being silly or whatever those things that. Again, it's reframing. All these for me, it's so much about reframing. So if the message was initially that we've reframed failure, that's an amazing thing to go. You're going to try something and it's not worked, but you learn from that and you go, and that's an amazing thing to do. Yeah. You're going to get rewarded for that in some way. Yeah. And like, do people speak up more, and do people say it again? Yeah. And that you can take that. We're talking about that in schools, but you take that into like you said, into the workplace. Yeah. I guess what do people like as leaders that are listening and people that run businesses, where do they even start when they look at that? I want to create a safe culture, a safe environment. Again, what's the starting point for something like that? How do we start at that?
It's firstly making a choice that that's what we want to do. Yeah. Do you want to invest in your staff? I mean, it seems obvious, but a lot of places don't do that. But if we acknowledge how common trauma is, so statistics, it's they're horrible, but it's important to say. So Office of National Statistics, so these are national statistics, 1 in 4 adult women over the age of 18 are severely sexually assaulted and raped in this country.
1 in 4.
1 in 4. The NSPCC, so the National Society for the Protection of Cruelty to Children, did a survey asking 11 to 17-year-olds, so kids, if they'd been sexually abused. 1 in 6 disclosed they had. That's in this country. So if leaders then look at their workforce, it's in there. And 1 in 5 kids are raised in a household with a perpetrator of domestic abuse. So with just those 3 stats, and then, of course, there's loads of other types of trauma, your staff, there's stuff there. So if we want to acknowledge that, and we want to create an environment where we've talked already, people who have experienced trauma, they will find it hard to speak up, to show up, to be in relation, to be seen. They'll want to put on masks to pretend they're fine and to people please and to just go along with things because that feels safe, because that's their learnt behaviour. So if we acknowledge that, but then we decide, okay, actually I want to create an environment where people feel safe to be them. And of course you don't want people to bring their home life into their work, but we acknowledge they're people, they're not just machines at work, and we create that environment. And we lead with compassion and understanding, and we encourage people to get it wrong and to make mistakes. and yes, to learn from them. It's not that you can just make mistakes with no consequences, but rather than if you get it wrong and you make a mistake, you're totally reprimanded. It's like, okay, then a culture of learning from it. Then people are more likely going to go, okay, then I might take that risk again and try that. So, and it can have a huge impact on the workplace. So Google did a study a few years ago, I think it was in 2016, 2015, looking at what made the best team, like what are the qualities that made a team work best. And the number one thing was psychological safety. And the other thing, so they had a list of 5 things, all of the other things were dependent on psychological safety being there. And if you have a trauma-informed workplace, it's a psychologically safe workplace. So this is, I mean, if we want to come down to it, this is what's going to make people more money. Like if they want to come down to the money, like that's always what talks, you're going to have a more productive workforce and you're going to make more money as a business if you invest from that place and it's psychologically safe and trauma-informed.
Wow. And I guess listening, like them statistics have just blown my mind a little bit. I'm just not, especially someone that's got 2 daughters, like, growing up in this world, thinking like that they're frightening statistics, right? But how can we create the world you're talking about creating? Is one that's a safer world, right? Not just workplaces, schools, society as a whole. And this, for me, listening, one of the starting points is this, right? Communication, having conversations around it.
And it's making the world safer and more fun and enjoyable for all genders. And that's the thing. This is not just, we've talked about, I've talked a lot about violence against women and girls, but it's boys don't grow up wanting to be like that, and parents don't want their kids to be like that. So having these conversations, having these hard conversations of looking, okay, what is it that is encouraging that kind of behaviour? And that point that kind of mentioned earlier, that bystander awareness of understanding if you see something, calling it out and understanding, okay, someone who's behaving like that, what's going on for them? I always think somebody who is content within themselves doesn't go around doing abusive stuff. So what can we do to help people feel at peace and content within themselves?
And just on that note, is there an acknowledgement as well that potentially, and again, I don't know the answer to this and I'd be interested to know, is it that we're aware that actually there are just some people out there that are doing bad things who are genuinely just inherently, that's in their makeup, in their DNA, in their nature, whatever, they're just bad people, and they've not had trauma to them, or will people that do bad things, there be a link to trauma? Is there any statistics around that, or what is the thought process around that?
I think there are some. I think there are always going to be some people who, have psychopathic, tendencies, traits, where there's no remorse, there's no understanding of responsibility, and so there are some people like that. But I think that there are often other links that perhaps we haven't looked at if we kind of look harder. I've worked on forensic psychiatry units and worked with people who are there because of abuse to others, and in their childhood they were abused, and so we were talking earlier about modelling, and if someone has had no modelling, they don't know. So not in any way saying that makes it their behaviour okay, but the point is, if somebody has had no modelling, no understanding, and their only model for love was abuse, that's what they might perpetuate. That's not saying that everybody who's abused is going to go on and be an abuser, but I think without having these conversations and without openly, transparently, properly looking at this in all areas, then we're not going to make progress. So the worst thing we can do is kind of where we're at the moment, of pretending it's not happening and dismissing it, because then we can't look at it and we can't resolve it. So I think yes, there are some people where there's inherently, there's always extremes, but I think most people don't mean to do harm.
I think, look, my jumper says it right. It says about there's so much. We talk about the hate and stuff in the world, but there's so much love in this world, and I do believe that. I think inherently people are kind, and but actually we don't necessarily see the news and social media. A lot of the bad stuff is portrayed. It's not that we're gonna try and gloss over that, because there is bad stuff happening, but if we can reduce that by creating more spaces where we're informed, where we talk, and we just, I guess, it's the levels of communication and the tools. I think are even wonderful upbringing as I had, I don't think I had the tools to be able to deal and communicate and speak still in these ways. And I'm trying to go, can we create a world where my kids, I am trying to create an environment like that where we can, like you're sitting opposite me now talking about trauma, not having that skill set to be able to learn, and now we are, because it's just, again, it's just creating environments where we reframe these, whatever these topics are that are seen as taboo now, that we've grown up inherently with, that we can change that.
Yeah, because I think it's understanding, when we have those conversations, it's understanding, most people will see, if we're going to look at what we've talked a lot about of violence against women and girls, if most people will say, okay, yeah, rape, okay, we get that, that's bad, but what about catcalling in the street? What about that kind of banter? What about upskirting? What about grabbing someone as they walk across the dance floor? What about, it's understanding that actually, if we allow all of those other things and we normalise that in behaviour in society and say, oh, it's just a bit of fun, that's okay, then we're permitting that escalation of more serious sexual assault and rape. So it's actually, if we need to call out the stuff that's kind of at the lower end of the pyramid, that we know there's research that shows that it escalates. And that's what we can all do. And that's what I mean. There are some people who just won't get that at all, and you're going to have those people in society. But when we normalise banter and humiliation of young girls, and you can see young girls, when they start to develop, they're kind of this kind of realization of how they get attention in a different way, and like, that's not okay. It's not okay. So if we can acknowledge that that's not okay, and if we can have that awareness, if we see our mates and people around us doing that, and we can say, do you know what, it's not okay to do that, it makes people think, and then maybe they won't do it next time, and you can start to shift people's behaviour. But that's where we need to do it collectively.
And because I tell you what I feel, and some of the stuff I've listened to and I've heard recently as well, the detriment to this as well on this scale is also, like I said, we're very much talking, and all the things you've mentioned, 100% they're wrong. They shouldn't be happening. The other side to this is actually a lot of men and boys don't know what, right? So they're really confused. So they look at it and go, because what this does is actually has an impact on relationships. It has an impact on how we continue to grow this world and procreate and stuff, because actually boys don't know how to communicate. Then they don't know how to go and approach a girl.
Exactly.
It's all on apps now, and then we see, and then there's porn, and there's all these other things that we look at and we go, this is how it is to behave as a man, and that's wrong. And then if you are a kind person and you wouldn't dream of touching someone walking past in a club, or you wouldn't do that, but then actually you don't know how to communicate, and you don't know how to, I'm never going to get a girlfriend and I'm going to be on my own forever.
Exactly.
And then that becomes isolation and loneliness, and then there's another epidemic.
And then there's a whole thing about, exactly. And that's the point. That's where looking at this will benefit everybody. And that's what's really important. It's really important that we look at this, that it's not just educating certain people or certain groups of society. It needs to be across the board so that we come back to that communication, because ultimately what all of us want is to connect with each other. And whether that's to connect in a friendship, whether that's connecting in an intimate relationship, whether that's having a professional connection, but that connection, that human to human connection, we're wired to need that. We crave that. Without connection, if you think ancestrally, without being in other people in a tribe, we die. We need each other. But we've now, I think, moved to a place where we don't quite know how to connect and what's okay. So we need to talk about it. And that's where we need role modeling, and we just need open conversations. And that's where we can also help each other call it out without judgment. So it's that without judgment and with compassion, just reminding each other what we can do, how we can change things. That's how we can grow together.
It's so much of the stuff I'm trying to do is around connection, human connect. I'm fascinated by AI and technology, and I think it's just one amazing tool and amazing things. But what lights me up and what I get my most value from is human connect. Whether I'm sitting opposite someone amazing like yourself and I'm having an amazing conversation, or I'm hosting a top table event and there's people, all of these things, there's so many different things, but human connection is what we're here for, what we crave. And for me, there's got to be, we've got to lean into that so much more with
Absolutely.
the way AI and modern tech, because we could go down another slope, right? Yeah. And actually, if we just go, this is what's important, human connection is what is going to make the world a better place. Yeah. That we can move away from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Honestly, I could talk to you for ages. There's so we are coming towards the end. A couple of things I just wanted to tap into. Really, what if you could? I guess with something about healing. What's the one truth I guess that you could give, or for people listening, to help them heal? Because I think one of the things that you've highlighted is, and you talking so openly on this, is hope, right? By you talking and sharing and what you're trying to do gives people hope. And it's sometimes, and I talk around that, especially within in the suicide space and suicide prevention, hope is such a big thing. But I guess what's the one thing you wish everyone knew about healing, about that process that you've been through, that you could leave people with? So,
really good question. So the fundamental thing, I mean, the main thing, I've said it already, healing's possible for everyone. The way that people do that, there isn't one path. So there isn't one way. And the thing to remember behind that, the kind of principle behind that acute stress, so that acute survival response that we have, that acute stress keeps us alive. We all need that. But when we get stuck in that stress response, in that trauma response, that leads to chronic stress, and that leads to toxic stress. And that toxic stress impacts every cell of our body. And there's loads of research around this, like people can look up papers online about this. So it affects our brains and our bodies and causes inflammation throughout the brain and body. And if it's neuroinflammation, so brain inflammation, it comes out as anxiety, depression, brain fog, insomnia. If it's in the body, it can be anything from autoimmune conditions, skin conditions, migraines, gut issues, constipation, anything. It's not to say that everybody who has trauma is going to get all of these conditions, but there's an increased risk. So anything that we do to reduce inflammation will help reduce symptoms. So things that can help reduce inflammation can be anything from making sure you drink enough water, going out in nature, looking up and seeing the stars, eating an extra portion of vegetables, hugging someone that you care about, stroking a dog, swimming in the sea. there's so many different things that can help reduce inflammation. And the thing that I say over and over to people, because it can feel like there's so many different things that you can do, even just one tiny thing can change the course of your life. So if you think of an oil tanker, like how massive an oil tanker is, even if you slightly change the course of an oil tanker, it ends up in a completely different destination. So we don't need to do everything all at once. We can very slowly do these different things. And then we end up somewhere different.
Amazing. What an absolutely fascinating... my mind is... You need to come back on for part 2, I think, because there's more questions. But thank you so much, honestly. What a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and so much to take away. And my hope is that people listening will, even if they take one thing away from it, like you just said, what a great way to finish. Almost, it can change potentially the course of their life. So I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. It's been a real privilege to sit here talking to you, and just, you making it feel so easy and safe to be vulnerable. Thank you.
Well, look, we're going to finish with our new tradition that we've got on the podcast. You haven't been to one of our top table events yet, have you?
No,
but
no.
You will do. So These are our storytelling cards. So I'm going to ask you to pick a card, any card, and then pass it back to me, and I'll read you a question. Okay. How do you measure growth in your own life? What signs or changes do you look for?
Gosh. I think my reactivity to things. So looking at how patient or impatient I am, whether I'm able to slow down and notice things. And I think, like, recently I had, with the work I do, sometimes hear some difficult things. And that I gave myself that permission to just walk down to the sea, notice the sun was setting, and rather than rush off, I just sat and just watched the sun. And it's that giving permission for things that I know nourish my soul. And then I know that has impacts on the people I interact with afterwards.
Thank you so much. It's been amazing, honestly. I'm so grateful. And as they say, is a wrap.